Hello, shalom.
Shalom uvracha.
Uvracha, shalom, shalom. Chag Sameach, Chag Or Sameach.
I don't think we ever spoke before.
We didn't. I was just thinking, wow, I think we've only traded comments on Facebook posts and a couple of things like that. I don't think we've ever actually spoken.
Cool.
I was trying to remember if we ever had. I don't think we have. Shalom, shalom. How are you doing?
I am just getting settled. I just moved back to the U.S.
Wow. So you were here again? Because I thought you were in the U.S.
I moved back to Israel planning to do my master's there, but I moved back planning to come back. And basically, when I decided that it wouldn't be necessary to do a master's, I don't think it's worth the time and the money. Then I decided to
Right.
go ahead and come back to the U.S. Yep.
Cool. I can't believe we never got together. Actually, I remember thinking about it once. I think I did know you were here maybe a half a year ago. How long have you been? Were
I
you
was
here?
there for 9 months.
9 months. Okay, so
Yeah.
I think it must have been when you just got back, and I never got around to it. So I do apologize for that.
So I am one of a people without a land for a land without a people, I guess.
Yeah, we pretty much all choose what the combination of sacrifices are today. There's a smorgasbord of various sacrifices you can choose. And that's what we do is we just choose the particular one from column A and two from column B kind of thing.
So tell me about your views about the place of the land of Israel in relation to the Jewish faith, and like
Right.
the differences between converts and someone who's born in with a Jewish legal status. I think that's
Right.
sort of the focus that we were planning to
Right.
talk
This
about.
is the thing I've been wanting to also take up with Asher for a while because I listen to his videos and
Just know I
we
don't
even
represent him.
yeah.
I
No, I
mean,
understand you're not. I'm just saying. This is to tell you the truth, it's not just about him because this is obviously something. I mean, I'm sure. I know you've been involved, if I'm not mistaken, in commenting on this whole thing of the Ger movement with Dave Katz and
actually
Chaim Klor.
probably not. I've only vaguely
Okay.
heard of it, and I don't know so much about it.
So it's a burning issue. Actually, it's probably I would say it's becoming more burning, but it's been a burning issue for a while since the whole 10 tribes thing got started. As far as I can tell, I mean, certainly over the last 15 or 20 years, various groups have jumped on this wagon of, the 10 tribes, and I've met numerous converts that, it wasn't just enough that they converted. They basically felt like they were coming home, that they must be part of the 10 tribes.
Right.
And
They put too much stock in ancestral, like genetic ancestry.
right. Well, to tell you the truth, it's really two things. It's also a spiritual thing for a lot of these people. I mean, I have a very dear friend who was a convert who, um, just feels very strongly about this. And I don't really think that she doesn't take it as being like a genetic thing per se. She actually sees it as much more also of a spiritual thing. And that's actually part of, what I want to bring up here.
Okay.
But, yes, I mean, the fact is that there are people who I believe stress overly a genetic issue. I personally um, believe, first of all, that there is a race issue, there's a nation issue. All of these attributes can be discussed to varying degrees. Although I do also believe, and I think it's important to, which one of the things that I respect people that bring it up, I do believe that the teachings of God are obviously for the whole world, for all of humanity. All of humanity is the creation of God. The question is, what are the circumstances? How does it work? What's for the best? And you can take it either way. I mean, personally, I, in my more cynical moments, would say things like, "Well, to tell you the truth, all of humanity is messed up, including the Jewish people."
Well,
And
are
then
we? I don't really understand where you're coming from. Are you talking about um, what to make of the current reality, or like the current norms and perceptions among the Jewish people, or are you talking about what the Torah's intention is?
Well, I wasn't talking about any of that. I'm just mentioning it as a general throwouts at the
Okay.
moment. I personally believe that when we approach the Torah, we do have to ask the question: can we ascertain what God's intentions seem to be? A, is there a nation? B, does that nation have some special status?
Mm-hmm.
C, how does the convert fit into that? And then finally, how does the rest of humanity fit into that? That's the way I've broken it down.
All right.
Okay, so B'kitzur, I'll just jump on and say I do believe that there is a nation, and I believe that God makes it clear in the Torah that His plan operates through a nation, meaning that He chose Avraham for the reasons that the Torah outlines, and the entire plan was therefore shaped to fit Avraham and his circumstances and the nation that came from his loins. And then everything fits into that as time goes on. And I happen to think that not only is scripturally provable, I believe it's logical and reasonable as well to see how that it would be necessary for there to be a nation that was chosen to stand for a certain something. Then I do believe that it's important to ask the question, so what about everybody else? Going to the opposite extreme. And I do believe that there's what to say about what the everybody else is, meaning that I don't believe that just because there's a Jewish nation, and I don't even, to tell you the truth, I'll be honest, I don't like using the term Jewish for this because it's not about Jewish, it's about Torah.
Right.
So, there is a Torah nation, there is supposed to be a Torah nation, and everything else fits itself in conjunction with that concept of the Torah nation. That's, if I could put it in the most general but clear terms, that's what I believe. Now, one of the things so I mentioned this concept of the Ger movement that this Dave Katz got started. Basically, he didn't really, it's not an absolutely novel idea by him, but essentially what he has gone on record as saying is that there are really 4 branches to the nation of Israel. There is Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, and then what he calls Ger or Ger Toshav. But he's gone on record as saying things like a person doesn't actually have to convert. If they just accept the Torah, then they become automatically of Ger, and they're inherently equal to any of the other 3 branches of the nation.
What equal in what way?
Well, he says everything. He actually recently went on record on a video of saying that he believes that a Ger can marry a Jew, an Israelite.
You're not talking about a normative Ger.
I'm not talking about normative convert.
Right.
No, I'm not talking about. He actually believes that if let's say that Mary Beth Johnson woke up in Oshkosh, Wisconsin on any given Monday morning, and she said, "I'm accepting the Torah of God upon myself," she automatically becomes this thing called Ger, and that she could even marry a born Israelite.
So I actually recall reading, I believe it's in Yosef Eliyah, but I cannot tell you off the top of my head exactly where. But in the place where the Rambam discussed the prohibition of intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews, and his wording there does seem, and I'm saying this as someone who's completely unfamiliar with this movement you're talking about.
Right.
His wording there does insinuate to me that he was under the impression that the prohibition against intermarriage with a non-idolater is rabbinic.
Okay, that would be correct, except there's one problem. To say something, the prohibition is only rabbinic, does not mean to say that it's mutar.
Obviously, but that's an entirely. Also, we haven't established whether it's only rabbinic. I'm just saying it. No, I can see where there might be such a. I mean, if you're looking at the straightforward text of the Torah by itself, it really emphasizes intermarriage with idolatrous people. So
and that would make perfect sense that at least one opinion would say that the main goal was to prohibit marrying idolaters
But
because.
but
Go
then
ahead.
on the flip side, well, you go ahead and finish your thought.
I was
Sorry.
just to say, but that's not to say that just because that's the actual prohibition, that if Mary Beth Johnson then went and married an Israelite, that her children would also be considered Israelites,
Right.
or
So
that it would not engage in other issues.
I was going to say that even if that's the case, that perhaps on a technicality, the Torah's prohibition is only with regard to marrying idolaters, and that any other stringency is rabbinic. That doesn't take away from the fact that in the overall context of the Torah, of the language of the Torah, if someone is not an idolater, if they've taken it upon themselves to follow the God of Israel, they are going to follow through with joining the people of Israel. There's nothing that should hold them back from doing that. Why would they want to make any such distinction? Which really brings me to the conclusion that the entirety of such a movement springs out of a reaction to how difficult and messed up, how complicated modern Orthodox, I don't mean modern Orthodoxy as a movement, but Orthodoxy in our time has made conversion. In other words,
A hundred percent,
I
and I
think
would agree with you on
this
that.
movement wouldn't even exist if if there weren't such problems. And I think we both know from listening to you before that regardless of particular details of how to do it, I'm pretty sure we both agree that the way of relating to potential converts and the way in which it's drawn out is not in accord with Jewish sources,
With Torah sources, 100%, I agree with you. I
whether
think that
rabbinic or biblical.
right. No, exactly. Yeah, it's. I mean, you could call it the levels of corruption. I mean, I would go that far.
Sin begetteth sin.
Right. No, 100%, because ultimately, when we talk about the nation, we have to recognize that there are there's an idea in Hashkafa that says that there's mitzvah, there's mutar, and then there's avera. That the actions that a man can involve himself in can be broken down grossly into three categories: the things that are mitzvah to do, that which is simply permissible to do, meaning you're not obligated necessarily to do it. It's not a mitzvah, it's not a command of God, but one can choose to do it. And then there's avera, that there's that which is forbidden to do. And I believe very strongly that when we talk about the path to God and from a Torah perspective, we can also show that people can actually take mitzvah and corrupt it into something which is, veritably, if not already an avera, then on that level, I agree with you. I think
Well, the
it's
way that they relate to the conversion process is not even a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah.
that's the thing. It's not a mitzvah. I mean, first of all,
I would say to convert is a mitzvah. You even have, at least in the rabbinic tradition, because you have in the blessing for converting, for circumcising converts, who commanded us to circumcise converts. But I mean, the way in which they do the conversion process is not a
totally
command. It
yeah.
seems
It's totally
totally an
out of hand.
avera, not even.
First of all, I mean, the irony is, if you talk to, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this, but I actually have empirical evidence. This is true. If you talk to Rabbanim involved in conversion, the vast majority of them will say that it makes it so hard to protect the Jewish nation, so that people that aren't fit get in. And yet, I can tell you quite honestly, after 40 plus years of experience with this, that all the time I see people allowed to convert that aren't, quote,
Me,
fit to be allowed in, and good people are chased away because they
exactly.
won't
I
put
saw
up
this
with
during my own conversion. I saw women who the rabbi clearly knew, and it was known to everybody, that certain women who were going through a conversion process and passed me up, they were only converting in order to marry. They had
Of
no
course.
original. And then with myself, they dropped me in when I was converting through the Chicago Rabbinical Council under a rabbi in Louisiana. He's no longer there, thank goodness, but now he's messing up some other place probably. But they dropped me because I could not swear to them that I would always go by Ashkenazi custom.
Right. I mean, I listen. We
It's
could
absurd,
write books.
absurd.
we could write books and books and books of stories like this. I mean, I'll tell one story. My main student when I had my yeshiva was a Dutch convert, and before he met me, he basically he had taken on much more Hasidic approach to his service of God, and he wore the hat, he wore the uniform, he had the peyot, he had the beard, the whole thing. And he was converting to a private Beit Din here in Eretz Yisrael, and but it was a Beit Din that was sanctioned by the Rabbanut. So basically, what would happen is when he was getting his conversion through this Beit Din, they told him he should go to the Rabbanut and open up a file and begin the process so that he could be accepted by the Rabbanut. And he walked into the first time for his first appointment. He walked into the Beit Din there, and he met with this one Dayan. It wasn't a Beit Din yet. He was just beginning the process of opening the file. And the Dayan asked him two questions. The first question was, do you respect the state of Israel? What this has to do with the process of conversion, please explain to me. But then the second question was even better. He looked at this young man wearing the long black coat and the flat black hat and the long peyot and the beard, and I kid you not, his second question was, do you celebrate Israeli Independence Day?
Oh wow.
So my student was a very intelligent and capable of sarcasm person. So he said back to this person, "Do I look like I'm the kind of person that celebrates
Oh gosh.
Israeli independence?"
You know, I'd like to make a point here on both sides. On the one hand, because the Rabbanut it's officially connected to the Israeli government. It's not. I mean, there's a legal connection there.
Right, correct. That's all there is.
So I can understand.
That's the only reason the Rabbanut has any value and has any authority at all,
Right.
is because of that.
I can understand them asking this, but it doesn't justify it as anything connected to the validity of that person as a proper, acceptable potential convert.
No, and therefore you're being nice, but yeah.
But on the other hand, the state of Israel does represent to many people the right of the Jewish people to live in the Jewish homeland. But then that would be a case of semantics. Like he could have expressed it in a less politicized way. Like that's what Zionism doesn't necessarily mean that you endorse the state of Israel as it is right now. It just means you're in favor of the right of a Jewish person to live in the Jewish homeland.
Correct. I mean, I do not endorse the state presently, and I feel very strongly Zionistic that I want the Jewish people to be here. I want there to be a Jewish state, meaning I do want Jews to be the bosses. I just want them to follow, at least reason, if not Torah, rather than, what we have today. But even though I understand what you're saying, I would have to disagree that the point of the story was more to show that of whether or not those questions should even be on the list of questions asked. For them to be the first two questions, that's preposterous beyond comprehension. That this young man walks in having a certain look. The Dayan was not a young boy. He was obviously somebody who had experienced life in Israel for many decades, and he knew very well what a Hasidic-looking boy looked like.
Right.
And here was a young man walking in who was dressed Hasidic, and he chose, because it was his authority to choose, to ask questions that were beyond the pale of reason for what you would ask a prospective convert.
Well, given the way that he looked, asking a question that would expect a negative answer, one that would
because he was
portray him as invalid. Failure. Right.
Yeah, he was
exactly.
And this is the problem.
I had the same problem in Israel. I went to the Rabbanut, I don't know how many times, literally tens upon tens of times. I want to say nearly 100 times over the duration of 3 years, just to find out why I wasn't able to make Aliyah. And of course, you can't work there legally unless you have citizenship and you're living there. So I needed to get citizenship.
And in order to get citizenship, you needed to have your conversion accepted.
Right. So my conversion was eventually accepted, but only with the help of a lawyer. And I didn't even have a clue as to what the issue was. Not because I hadn't asked. I had asked everybody in the Rabbanut
Right.
and in the Misrar Panim. No one told me what the issue was. It's not that it's not even that like it was. I don't know. It's just so absurd. I can't even. I can't even
It was like
believe
you
it
didn't have a
happened.
right. You did not have a right to know.
Right. But then when I would go, this is the catch point. When I would show them my papers at the Rabbanut, they would say, yes, you're Jewish. They would recognize me as Jewish orally when I was there physically.
Right, but they would
Meaning,
never give you the right.
but they would
Exactly.
not tell me why they are not able to give a
Right.
certification for it, even though they knew. It just
Right.
they could have figured it out.
Right. And this gets us back to basically the issue of where we are today and why I believe, even though I will be honest in saying that the nation is not operating properly as the nation of Torah, still in all, I do believe that it has more to do with this problem that we're discussing and the situations that they arise really do point to why it is that there has to be a nation, a Torah nation, rather than just people who decide to come to serve God and therefore, follow the dictates of the Torah, on their own cognizance. But corruption is corruption is corruption, and even a Torah state can be corrupted, and that's basically
Absolutely.
what we have today. So, but to get back to it, I basically, the reason why I believe there has to be a Torah nation, meaning that God chose Abraham and his descendants, and they were given the task of becoming and I don't like to use the genetics so much because I think almost genetics is almost an accident of it, but
I think it's an accident that was not an accident, but more so a result of Christian and Islamic prohibition upon the Jewish people to accept converts for nearly 2,000 years. So
well, I would,
they
I mean,
automatically became an ethnicity, multiple ethnicities
well,
actually.
you have to remember that first of all, that the nation of Israel existed for a long time before that
Right, but
happened.
they accepted myriads of converts before that as well.
And that's what I'm saying is so that even if you were to say that what you just said, the fact is that for half the nation's history, that those rules did not apply to them, and that we know that they brought in many, many, many converts. I'm obviously proof that even in Christian Europe, there were many converts
That's
brought
believed to
into.
be only in the first few generations, at least up until
Well,
when
again,
Christianity.
let's put it this way. I find, these things, even if it was only the first few generations, it was obviously a broad enough mixture that it wouldn't have mattered anymore.
Right.
Even if you stopped at some point, because, I mean, here I am, blonde haired, blue eyed.
Well, I believe that even though it's true what you're saying, that a substantial part of the Jewish history did include a large intake of converts, but that is not the part of Jewish history that has most affected us in the present era.
Well,
We're most
again,
affected
right.
by 2 millennia of not accepting converts, and that's
Well,
good.
again, I have not seen facts that say that conversion dropped to some less than X%
Oh,
during that time. I'm
well,
assuming that it was
you
much
don't you
harder for
don't need a specific number to know that it was drastically less when both
no,
in
no,
Christianity
but I'm
and in
saying
Islam, Jewish. I mean, there are plenty of
no, no.
records saying that Jewish communities would be ransacked if
No,
people converted.
yeah,
It was illegal.
well, let's put it this way: there are two ways that convert blood can come into the nation. You're right. The fact is obviously that I think certainly under Christian domination for many, many, many centuries, the number of actual converts was probably very small. On the other
This
hand,
is
I
also why
would
Jews have so many genetic issues.
well, and it's true, but on the other hand, I wouldn't, I would also say that there obviously were mixtures of genetics, if not through conversion, then through other acts, unseemly acts that
Right.
basically, brought in. But I mean, I was acting, or I was, let's say, arguing against your statement from a different purpose.
I
I
don't know
don't
which
think
statement are you arguing against.
a concept of the genetic mixture. In other words, when I said that I don't like using the term genetics, it's not because it isn't there, but because When I said it was an accident, I mean that it was the nation that was chosen as the loins from the loins of Abraham, not because of its genetics per se, but because of Abraham. And so the concept was fixed in the Torah that there should be a nation that everything else revolves around, or it has to operate in relation to. And I think it's very clear throughout the Torah that the plan of God was that this nation exists, the rules apply to the nation, and that everything else orients itself in relationship to this nation. Now, that being the case, then we just have to ask ourselves, or try to understand, what was God's plan for the convert, and or what do we know about how that operates? And, second of all, what about the rest of humanity? How does the rest of humanity relate to this? And specifically for me, it boils down to the place of the convert in the Torah, and explaining how the laws shape that being.
What is the place of a convert in the Torah, in your view?
So first of all, I believe 1,000% that the Torah is not bigoted or racist, and so therefore, obviously, the fact that converts, at least from a Torah point of view, are 100% allowed, except for those few cases that God outlined in the Torah, shows very clearly, first and foremost, that there is a process which allows for any human being that decides that their path must be to be as close to God as possible, is allowed to join themselves to the
What
Torah.
what people does the Torah prohibit from converting, even if it's a exceptional
Well,
case? We're
no,
talking.
specifically, yeah, we're talking like the 7 Canaanite nations under
All right.
certain
So where's that
circumstances.
prohibited?
Well, we could look up. That's why I told Asher that I wanted to do this a couple of days later, because I hadn't gotten all my sources
So you
together.
don't have
But
to give a specific source. I'm pretty sure I know what
no,
you're
we know
referring
that.
to, but you
Yeah,
can
no,
paraphrase it.
yeah, no. Listen, it says, first of all, that the 7 nations are to be destroyed. We know very clearly that there was a certain law which is discussed in the Talmud, that if it was a male from the 7 Canaanite nations that, let's say, had a child with any other nation, that child is considered as part of the 7 Canaanite nations which were to be destroyed. If it was a female Canaanite that had a child through anybody else, so then the child is considered to be of that nation of the father. There was the prohibition against the Egyptians until a certain generation, the prohibitions against male
So
Moabites,
all of
and
these, all
yeah,
of these past ideas that you're elaborating
referring
upon
to.
right now, again, I think we would both agree that you're paraphrasing. It's not word for word what the Torah says.
Correct.
So what the Torah
Correct.
says with regard to these is it uses the wording that they should not enter into the community.
Kahal.
Right.
Correct.
So according to the Mishneh Torah, that isn't in reference to conversion, but rather it's in reference to marrying a native-born Israelite. And that's the most straightforward meaning of the text if you think about it. You don't even have to you don't even have to force some sort of weird interpretation on the text, because if it were referring to simply conversion by the terminology enter into the community or the kahal, if that were the case, then what are you counting the number of generations from? For example, some of them it says after the second generation, others it says 10 generations, and one it says like forever.
Right.
But what are you
Right. So
counting it from? So if it's referring um, to conversion, at what point does that count begin? But if it's and that remains ambiguous. But if it's referring to marriage after having converted, well then it's clear where the count begins from the time that the father or grandfather converted. Then a certain number of generations later, then the descendants of the original converts are able to marry native-born Israelites, and that's the way the
well,
Rambam
that
explains it.
right, but that first of all, I'm not arguing against that, but that would only apply to Moabites and to the Amorites. It wouldn't apply to the Amalekites, and it wouldn't
Why wouldn't
apply
it? Why
to,
wouldn't it apply? Because you're supposed to kill them all.
because they were supposed to be destroyed.
Okay,
They
so
can't
even
convert them
even
all, but
that is different. At least
okay,
according to
one
Mishnah
second.
Torah. Go ahead.
Right, I want to bring up a different point though, but
Okay.
the other point that has to be brought up is, even so, even being what you said is true, then there obviously are two classes of convert, because you're basically
Right.
admitting that there is a convert who can become Jewish but is not allowed to become part of the nation.
Well, he is a
And
part of
so,
the nation. He's not allowed to intermarry
no,
and. Go
yeah,
ahead.
but okay, so that
Yeah, yeah.
means
There's
that
a distinction,
some
but
level, yeah, a big distinction, a huge
yeah,
distinction,
yeah.
right? Because, again, I'm
And
not
again, it's
saying
not
that,
genetic. It's not a genetic distinction because
no,
after a
it's not,
certain number of
it's not,
generations, then their descendants, after let's
right,
say 2 or 4 or whatever generations, they're still just as genetically that
yeah, but,
original person, but
right,
they've
but
been
if I,
a part of the Jewish people for a longer amount of time.
right,
They've been
and
acculturated.
that's, right, and that certainly just strengthens the idea of those people that think that there's some kind of genetic superiority, that just knocks that down
Right, it's
1,000.
for sure not
And I
genetic
don't have,
superiority.
right,
It's
and I don't
cultural
have a problem,
superiority.
right. On the other hand, we would have to answer certain questions in order to explain this subject fully. Like, for instance, why would it be, therefore, that if a person converts and we accept them 100% into the nation, why can't the female convert marry a Kohen, right?
Hmm.
Why specifically
Well, we
from
know
the
why.
oral? Well, no, I mean, okay, you can tell me.
You
I'd
know
be
why,
happy.
I'm assuming.
Tell me why. I mean, I'm asking honestly. Why do you think that is the
Well,
case? Because,
most.
in other words, the question is, if a convert is accepted 100% into the nation, why are there these places that we see that limit the convert in certain
First of
ways?
all,
Like,
limitations on marriage doesn't have any bearing on the extent to which they are the validity of their being a part of the nation, because we know
I'm not arguing that. I'm
there's
asking.
certainly
We have to.
distinctions. I'm not just disputing that, but the distinctions exist only in the first generation or for a few generations for those specific 7 nations.
100%,
Okay,
a
but
hundred percent. I
but
agree with
when
you
it comes
100%.
to that particular example that you're giving about a female convert not marrying a Kohen, we both know that that's because she has a status of being, that she had relations.
Okay,
Um,
so that's what I thought. Where you might going? I don't believe that. First of all, that's obviously a legal. That's legal language.
right. Well,
But
that's the language
I
that the
mean,
Talmud
I
uses,
think,
and the prohibition is
right,
entirely in the context of rabbinic law. It's not. I'm not saying it's
exactly. In other
rabbinic
words,
law,
the
but it's
Torah.
it's a rabbinic
No, the Torah
idea.
doesn't say that.
Right.
The Torah doesn't say. In other words, I personally believe that. How should I say this? I think that we can actually explain that categorically different if we're just looking at the Torah over using the Talmudic language. Meaning, it may be that the sages of the Talmud said this idea, but that doesn't actually explain what the Torah intended. I don't believe that God is basically saying, oh, because we have to assume that every female convert is not a virgin, so then that's why we have to prohibit
I
the
don't.
Kohen from. I don't think that's what's going
I
on.
also
I
don't
think
think that everything in Talmudic literature is immutable by nature. I think that
okay,
some of those
good.
things
So
can be changed within certain frameworks, but obviously it has to be within a proper legal framework, which
right,
we've been deprived for
right,
2,000 years.
and
So,
and right, and I want to keep.
well, at a time that it was common among certain peoples for females to have been, even young girls to have been, sexually abused or whatever, that would make more sense. But in another culture, in a more modern culture, well, even in modern cultures, it sometimes happens. But we both know that even among non-Israelites, cultures vary both from time to time and also
Oh, of
from
course, because
location.
man, like I said, that's why. First of all, I mean, I want to reiterate something. I do not, in any way, shape, or form, condone the idea amongst a person that how you were born or where you were born has any spiritual effect on you, except for the personal effect that you might have to deal with certain things in
Right.
your growth
Yeah.
with Hashem. I love
And that
quoting
can
this.
also be genetic. I mean,
It can be
genetics are
genetic.
are a reality.
Now, look, I mean, anybody who ignores the reality that some of our, I mean, look at David Melech, for God's sake. I mean, he was born fully into the tribe of Yehuda, and he had his personal issues that he had to overcome and grow, and he had to do tshuva before God. I mean, the whole idea that today this concept has been, and it's almost disgusting is the word I would use. When I have been involved with discussing with people this issue of converts versus born Jews, and people bring out these ideas about somehow trying to evaluate or give a value to somebody just because one was born from the womb of a Jewish mother and another was born from the womb of a non-Jewish mother. I mean, it's beyond comprehension. On the other hand, I think what I was trying to do was not argue the legal issue to separate the convert out, but just to show that even though they become 100% part of the nation, there are still certain rules which apply. And what I was hoping to do was try and give over a brief idea of why that has to be that way,
Okay.
which again strengthens the idea of the nation.
Okay, go ahead.
So I basically want to say, and this is a very grossly general way of looking at it, but I believe that the case can be made for it, that once God chose a nation, that there had to be a nation. And even though, because he's God and he understands that all of humanity is his creation, he, in more than one way, opened the door for people to come cleave to him. Insofar as a person decides to cleave to the nation, the rules governing that person's interaction with the nation have to always be aimed at guarding the nation to stay the nation. And so I believe that actually you can explain these various rules that apply to converts as showing very clearly that their only purpose is to protect the status of the nation, that it should retain a certain cohesion as a nation. That was the original plan. Now, whether or not that still exists because of certain things that happen, that's another question. But ultimately, that when a person becomes a convert, the reason why they cannot become king, the reason why a female convert cannot marry a Kohen, but her daughter can, the reason, all these things are actually aimed very simply at always creating the borders or boundaries under which the nation is to remain a nation.
I don't think that's anything particularly unique to the people of Israel.
It may not be, but I believe that that's why it had to be that
Right,
way.
but
In
also
other
when you
words,
say nation, I mean, a nation, again, like on the one hand, you say that it's not really such a genetic issue, but on the other hand, like when you say nation, there are different types of nations, but you can have a nation which is not limited or in any way based upon, in the present, based upon lineage. It may be based
correct.
upon originally on a certain particular family, but that's really what I think is the case with the people of Israel. I
Well,
see
today I
it.
agree with
Go
you
ahead.
because you see the 10 tribes have, totally disappeared, right? I mean, in
Right.
other words, we have this idea, and I agree
I
with
think that
you
that's
that,
all that it was for, was to establish this nation. But I also I totally agree with you regarding um, that, for example, the whoever is a king, he should be from among the people of Israel. I don't think it has to be someone who's genetically from the people of Israel, but it's not
no, because
supposed to be
obviously
like. Go ahead.
a second generation convert could be,
Right. They don't
if
even have to
if
be a descendant of King David. They only have to be a descendant of King David to be a part of a dynasty.
no, I understand that, but I'm saying that any second generation, born of a
Right. Right.
convert and an Israelite can become a king, no question about it. But that in and of itself, that structure already, I believe, is fundamental in establishing the anchors that would normally keep the nation. Even though I actually agree with you that today the state of the nation is absolutely and fundamentally different than what it was originally set up.
I don't think it's completely different, but it's pretty
Well,
substantially. It's substantially different.
we don't live in tribal organizations. The
Right.
fact is that even though I do believe that there probably are, quote, genetically, every tribe is represented in the people that have survived
It's not
as
organized along those lines.
it's not organized, and there's no way of ascertaining it. And then there's this concept of whether or not miraculously will go back to that.
But
or
I really
not.
think that the entire point of that was simply for the purpose of um, governmental rule, in a sense of like jurisdictions, like counties
Okay,
in the
but
United States, or
even
and
so,
you
I
go
still
ahead.
believe that fundamentally relates to the concept of nation, Torah nation as a nation. I mean,
Right. And
again,
you see
I
in the
don't
book
think
of
that this is a
Ezekiel that
contradiction.
the converts who live in those particular places are counted among the particular tribe in which they dwell. So already from the book of Ezekiel,
Yeah,
you see
right.
that.
And Ezekiel even says, I only actually stumbled across this. I mean, embarrassedly, I'll admit, recently, that basically when the redemption occurs, that converts will be adopted into tribes and
Exactly.
actually be given full, but ultimately that's only then. It wasn't back in the day, and
Right.
so I think that's a proof that there was a need to
Well, they still
establish.
existed with a clear identity at that in history.
Right, and the nation had to as well, and so that's why I argue against this concept that the nation doesn't matter, that it's only the person who cleaves to God, even though obviously the person cleaving to God is of primary importance
Ah,
vis-a-vis.
well, I don't know if we had a dispute from the outset in any case with regard to that. I also
We
believe that.
hadn't gotten there yet,
Oh,
but
okay.
yeah.
I do believe that the people of Israel are a nation. I just don't think that it's a nation in which um, ancestral heritage, like physical ancestry, is paramount to the extent that it is today. I think it is paramount for specific offices, and I think that's useful, offices such as king or high priest. And I think
Correct.
that's important to establish the historicity, the historical validity of the nation throughout all history to come. But in a general sense, I think it has very little significance.
Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't argue that, except for, and then we can get into this concept, which I mentioned before, of people today who have tried to establish a concept that you don't even have to be, quote, Jewish to be Jewish.
Well, what did you mean? I don't even know what you mean.
I mean, I'm saying that, like I said, I know at least several people I have heard essentially state the idea that if a person accepts the Torah upon themselves, then they are every bit as part of Israel as a born Israelite, and there is no necessary
Ah,
conversion process to join the nation.
I think that's
Uh,
true, but not in a functional or practical sense. I think it's true.
yeah, in other words, you think philosophically,
I
and
think it's true
yeah,
philosophically, but if they
okay,
want to
and
live it
that's
out, then they will make it formal. It needs
right,
to.
and that's my point. I agree with you. Obviously, uh,
You can't
first
just
of all,
create your own. Otherwise, people could just create their whole, like what you were talking about. They could create sort of like an alternative Israel or something.
right. Well, basically, yeah, and actually,
Which is no different from what Christianity has done in some sense.
essentially
I
100%.
mean, there are
This
whole
is
Christian denominations that really emphasize the idea that they are the new Israel.
correct. And I mean, I've had conversations with these people. I did like a 3 month investigation of the Black Hebrews, for instance, and they also are a people who basically claim that history is all a lie and that they're the true Israel. And
And yet, whatever
I
little
was
bit they
just
know about Hebrew, they got from Jews, and they just
well, yeah,
added
right.
unnecessary vowels here and there. But
Right. I tried to
Yahuwashi.
point that out. Right. I tried to point that out upon occasion, and I was called a son of Esau
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
a son of the
And the
devil.
only reason they know Islam exists is because Jews preserved the Bible.
Right. 100%. I mean, this
It's
is,
hilarious. It's
it is
absurd.
hilarious. But basically, so I agree with you, and I think that you raise an amazingly important point, and that is that if it were not for the concept within the Torah that keeps there's obviously a shift over time. There have been tremendous shifts in I would even say, in the spiritual outlook of Israel vis-a-vis the Torah. The Torah allows for these things because God created the world and he obviously understood and understands the nature of man. On the other hand, certain things must maintain a certain framework must continue to exist. And part of the problem, I believe, in the whole conversion process today is because of the negative side of that structure is being stressed instead of the positive side. In other words, instead of bringing people into Israel to become part of Israel, many of these rabbis are looking at non-Jews that want to convert as, we're perfect because we're Israel and you're not because you're not. But that's not what was meant. That's obviously not what God meant.
So obviously not the reality. I mean, it is the reality what you said, that's how many behave, but it's not the. I mean, clearly the people of Israel are not perfect.
no, the people of Israel are not perfect, and the fact is that um, this idea is just gross beyond comprehension that people should, think they have a right to be. I mean, for a Jew to show bigotry or race or any kind of racist attitude, to me is almost such an affront to God's creation. I mean, we have so many statements in the Torah and the Talmud,
The
which
entire Jewish people are made up of converts. I mean, it's
no,
true that
exactly.
it's
That's
true
number one.
it's true that the Jewish people or the people of Israel were established by the family of Abraham, but
But
all along, you see, especially in the first generations, it's emphasized
first,
that
Rashi
there were more non-Jewish people, quote
of
unquote. I
course.
mean, it didn't even exist as a Jewish nation by that
First
name,
of all,
but that more of them
first
were
of all,
non-Jewish women joining than there were men, like
in
all
the
of these
first
wives.
in the first three generations, we have one female being born. Between Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Yaakov had one daughter. That's it. So obviously, so of course everybody will quote the famous midrash, but basically that's just foolishness. And I always trot out Rashi. Rashi says very clearly in Shemot on the pasuk that mentions Shaul ben Hakananit. Rashi says very clearly that the men of the tribes married Egyptian women, Midianite women, but they had a rule that they would not marry Canaanite women. And so basically he's showing right there that, this idea that they didn't marry outside the tribe is foolishness because, Midrash notwithstanding, there were no women mentioned as being born that they could
They
marry.
didn't reproduce in the manner of amoeba asexually.
Correct.
It had to
And
come
this
from
just
somewhere.
right, and this just obviously continued for, from that point on, it always continued. So yes, I agree with you, and I think that my dream for the nation would be that we would get leaders that could actually begin reversing some of these horrible stereotypes that have gotten so strong in our nation. That first of all, fixing the conversion process so that it's reasonable. Second of all, national education so that we could actually make sure that people really understand what being part of the nation of Israel is. It's not genetic, it's not lox and cream cheese, but it's, moral ideas, and it's following the commands in the Torah.
Nothing against cream cheese.
Right. Nothing against lox or cream cheese. But, and I agree with
I
you
don't
that
like lox.
these movements that get started are started in the vacuum of negative trends that create the backlash, as has often happened in our nation. Hasidus got started because of a very negative, period in history when there was elitism amongst the Jews that learned Torah in Europe.
And then it turned into what it originally opposed.
Exactly, it became the most elitist movement, right? And that there's an irony there too, but that's for another discussion. So basically, to try and recap up to what we said today is I believe that there is a nation, there's supposed to be a nation, but that the Torah, first and foremost, is an open book to everybody that wishes to join it. Those two are fundamental beliefs, right? That nobody but nobody should automatically be rejectable from joining up with the nation. Then, like I said, the third thing is, if all of this is the case, so what about humanity? Where does humanity fit into this? I think so. I'm going to again say what I believe after my years of study. I do not believe that the plan is that the entire set of humanity should convert to become Israel. I think it's pretty clear from the books of the prophets that that's not destined to happen. And that opens the door to, okay, well, if that's the case, so if all these people are not going to become Israel, so what are they supposed to do? And I think that here mostly it's logic because for whatever reason, God said very little about this except for one or two verses. I think it's pretty clear that it's about the concept of perfection under God, meaning that once a person accepts and understands that God created, that there is a God and he created with a plan, the idea is that each person should be shown or on their own come to understanding how they could possibly fit into that plan. And whether you call it the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach or however you approach that, it's really very simple. It's about accepting God in one's life and figuring out what actions are acceptable to God and what actions aren't acceptable to God.
So
I
the
don't think,
main way I would disagree with that
yeah,
is that when someone decides that they want to live according to God's will, if they are seeking it with intellectual honesty and they have resources available, I see absolutely nothing that would hold them back from joining the people of Israel. Meaning, that's not to say that everyone in the world would or should become Jewish, but of those who truly seek to mold and conform their life to God's will to the extent of their ability, I don't see any reason why they would not do that by joining the people of Israel. Otherwise, they're
and
just creating their own personal philosophy, and the Torah never recognizes it.
no,
It's nowhere in the
so
Torah.
1 second. So first of all, I don't disagree with you, except I think that what you're doing is you're kind of promoting uh, a perfectionist attitude, which isn't reasonable. Meaning, what you said, which I fully agree with, is that a person who feels that they wish to be the pinnacle of God's plan in this world. Okay, I would agree with you. They probably are going to want to become part of Israel.
No, not the pinnacle, just to conform their life to God's will to the best
Okay,
of their ability.
that's it. But the thing is, the question is, are they is a human being obligated to do that, or is there a state where they could exist where they conform to that which God would command of them without becoming part of Israel? And I think that there is.
Right, so we have to
I
find where that is in the Torah.
well that so and I that's why I said logic, because I do believe that there are a few statements in the Torah which show the path. But even though I happen to be a firm believer in Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, I think that ultimately it's not quite as set out as, let's say, even the Rambam
Are,
documents
are
it.
those paths from before or after the Torah was given in the Torah?
Both. I think that that's the whole point of the Torah, is to show, to give the options and opportunity for people to investigate for themselves what it would mean to accept God the Creator in their life.
For example, with Abraham, although the Torah wasn't yet given, he submitted to whatever instruction God had available to him at the time, which is why, seems to me, why in the Aramaic paraphrase, I try to avoid using the Hebrew for whoever's listening. in the Aramaic paraphrase, onkelos, why he's called Jewish. Actually, several of them are called Jewish, even though they weren't yet Jewish, because they were embracing God's will to the extent of their ability.
Well, and I do believe that that's ultimately what the person has to strive for. The question is, what does that mean in action? And so
I don't
let's
think
put it this
most
way.
people do it, and I don't think
No,
most
well,
people ever will.
first of all, that brings up something else that I wanted to mention to counter your statement. You said that basically the idea is that if a person truly recognizes God's existence and the fact that He gave the Torah, then one would be hard pressed to understand why they wouldn't accept the need to convert. And I'll tell you why.
No,
Because
no,
of
no, no, no,
reality.
no, no. That's not my view. My view
Well, I
is
thought that's what you said.
no.
Go ahead.
Everything you said, plus, and they want, from their own will, they want to conform their life to God's will. The mere fact that someone acknowledges or is
Okay.
aware,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that they necessarily want to. That's so
Right, but
completely
now
different.
the thing is that in that desire to conform to God's will, if they see that in reality even the nation doesn't achieve that, in your eyes, would that mitigate their drive to actually join the nation of Israel? In other
No, because
words,
God's will isn't that we do everything perfectly. The 613 commandments don't apply to each and every individual,
no, of
and
course.
it takes into account the fact that we will make mistakes. We will not live up to perfection. The Torah doesn't demand perfection; it
No, of
demands
course not.
an aim.
Right, but what if I, as a non-Jew, realize that, let's say you're talking about an intelligent person that deliberates very carefully, he investigates, the Kuzari of
Okay.
today.
Yeah.
He comes to Israel, he investigates, he talks to people in Mea Sharim and people in Herzliya and people in the various other communities. He goes to the Rabbanim of the Rabbanut, and he basically comes to the realization, oh my gosh, these people are the people of God, but they're Bakoshi holding on to the Torah themselves.
But they're doing a
What?
much better job than everyone else I've been around and seen.
Oh no, that I don't. I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying, what if this person said,
Yeah.
for me personally, my service of God, as I understand it, would be much more likely to be successful if I don't join myself to this nation, but I just choose to serve God.
I would simply ask him, where do you find that in the Torah? You have to show a
Where do
place
you
that.
well, he's learned the Torah, so he's learned Hebrew, he's learned the
Mhm.
Torah, so he'll respond to you and say, where do you see that I have to join? Where does it say that I'm obligated to join? It doesn't. In
No,
other
it
words,
just it just restricts the blessings to the people of the covenant.
well, it doesn't say that there aren't blessings to anybody else. It just says that there are certain blessings. In other words,
Right, so you have no
there's no
promise
question.
from the Torah. It would just be pure speculation.
No, but what promise, again, as an individual, I'm not talking about the nation of Israel. I'm saying as an individual, what promise do any of us have outside of our service of God?
We have no promise.
Okay, so he's serving God too.
Yeah,
So why
but
should
the promise we have within the context of the service of God is according to the Torah of God. But with that individual, his belief of blessings within the service of God without joining the covenant has absolutely no standing on anything other than just his
so
own
so
supposition.
so you're gonna say that this God of the Torah that we've been talking about since this conversation started,
Hmm.
where everything is thought out and organized in a certain role, and the purpose of it is to bring people to serve God,
Hmm.
you're basically now saying, yeah, but he kind of just decided that these people that decide to serve him but don't join up for the nation for whatever reason, they're the ones that are on the outside. They're just like totally ignored. There's no benefit to them. Nothing comes to them.
I'm saying that if any benefit does come to them, it's not based on the Torah.
Okay, I think that that's a fundamentally flawed idea. I understand
We
that
have to
you're.
prove our words. I mean, I personally do believe that they can get blessings and benefit without
No, I think.
formally
Well, first of all,
converting, but I would also acknowledge that that belief of mine is not based on the Torah.
well, is logic part of the Torah?
So long as it conforms to the Torah.
Okay, good. So let's take a different tack. Did Abraham achieve blessings?
Abraham achieved a promise of blessings
No, he
from.
also achieved blessings. I think it's pretty clear,
Okay,
correct? I mean,
yeah, but he achieved it with prophecy, the same,
no.
prophecy, which is the
Yeah,
basis
but
of
I'm
the
saying
Torah.
if somebody asked you and they said, was did Abraham gain heavenly blessings from God?
If Isaac is a part of that, then sure.
No, I mean, in other words, we have this concept within the
I
Torah
don't
that
believe it's beyond God's ability. I just deny that the Torah teaches these blessings. The Torah does not promise these blessings to other people, and I think it's disingenuous to say that it does. We can say that with logic, as you have said a few times, with logic it would seem that it should, and perhaps it does, but we can't say that this is based on the Torah. It may be based on our
well,
looking
if let's put
between
it
the
this way,
text.
Right.
Go ahead.
So if that's the case, then I would say that if I accept your statement, then I'll say then it seems like God pretty much just left the rest of humanity out of the whole thing. In other words, where exactly in the Torah does God call out to the nations of the world, to all of humanity, to come join His Torah, and
Where with the nations that they're given the option to abandon their idolatry whenever
no,
they are conquered by the people of Israel.
where does it say that in the Torah? Actually, that's all oral law.
No,
Actually,
no, no, no. It's explicit in the Torah that they're called to peace. It doesn't only say that everybody for some reason remembers the commandment to like obliterate these nations, but the Torah itself in the written text, not just in the oral tradition,
says
explicitly gives a call to peace to those same nations. They're only to be obliterated if they don't accept this peace and abandon the idolatry. In that context, together with the other passages where
okay, one second. No,
go ahead.
before you go on with that, okay, for the moment, let's accept that as a given.
Okay.
So, therefore, God says, if you just establish peace with Israel, that's all I ask of you.
Right, but it has to be within the framework of the Torah, meaning
What
within
does
the
that mean?
within the framework of the Sanhedrin, which was established within the framework of the seven laws of Noah as a bare minimum for being allowed to live in the land of Israel. Then yes, but that's only within the land of Israel, and that's certainly not. They're
No,
not
I'm
even
saying
allowed.
so.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying you're basically saying that there's no call for people to join the Torah. They just have to live in peace with the nation of Israel under the Torah, whatever that means to you.
Right, but these are
But
people who are not seeking to do God's will. They're just seeking to not have to flee.
right, that's another thing. In other words,
So
these are
this is
just
a
the nations
different,
that
this is
happen to
clearly
be here.
distinct from who we've been
So
speaking
this
about
isn't
before.
right. This isn't the universal call.
That's
This is
true.
just a
Right.
particular.
Right, but it's sort of like prodding them in that direction.
Right, because they would have been here in the land. My
Right.
point being that if you're going to try to expand that to apply to the whole entire of
We have the
humanity,
text, you have the text in the Torah where it says that the nations will see you and they will consider you wise. What a amazing God. What a
good. And
wise
there's
God, right?
there's the famous one, which obviously is quoted all the time, of that you'll be Am Kohanim, and or Lagoyim. I mean, all of these statements, but ultimately these statements are so vague in terms of the practical what it means that you're going to be hard pressed
Well, what
to
does the
use.
Kohen teach?
Well, that's the question. I would say he just teaches the existence of God and the need for a person to avoid that which is evil in God's eyes.
Right, so
Simple.
I would say he teaches the Torah because that's the
Okay,
Torah.
that could be the same thing, but the question is, when you say that, do you mean that he teaches you have to put on tefillin, you have to say Shema before 3 hours, you have to keep Shabbat 39 malachot, and I mean, in other words, this is where it gets into the nitty gritty of
No, that
exactly
the
what.
nation that comes to you, the nation that sojourns among you, there will be one law for you and for him. The only
Yeah,
exception. Go ahead.
but that's only the nation that comes to to live amongst you. What about the 2 billion Chinese and the 1 billion Indians? I mean, let's say that they're perfectly happy living in Ceylon and Sri Lanka
Yeah,
and
they don't. I don't believe that they
India.
have to convert, but if they want to do God's will, then they will draw from the Torah, unless they just want to make stuff up.
No, but again, draw from the Torah. I don't have a problem with. The question is, what are they drawing from the Torah? What are they choosing to do?
Right. Well, they're gonna mix and match and create their own little idea, their own little
Yeah,
sub-religions.
let's no, again, let's talk about on the level of perfection. A group of people in China become aware of the creator of the universe, and in investigating, they come to realize that the only logical um, history that makes any sense to them is the history of the nation of Israel, the giving of the Torah. I mean, and we could talk about what proofs one can marshal to
Right.
make this claim, but for the moment, that's for a different
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
I'm saying let's say that they come to that moment and they say, "Wow, there is a creator of the universe. He did give a book of law to Moshe, who was a descendant of Abraham. This nation has weathered the calamities of history and has carried that Torah with them. And here they are today in 2017. This is the
And we're
law
allowed to join them,
action.
and why wouldn't we?
No, and let's say that they say,
Why
well,
would
I
they
live
not want to?
because they live in Beijing and
Well,
because
you don't
Israel is
have to
far
live in the
away.
land of Israel to be Jewish. You don't have to.
Actually, let's put it this way. For the moment, I'm going to say, like I said before, they could look around and they could say, okay, what calls me? Tell you what, call it a theoretical discussion. Put aside for the moment the idea that you believe that anybody who comes to this point would obviously have to convert.
They
Because
don't
again,
have to convert. They'd want to.
no, I mean, when I say have to, I mean that they would feel no other recourse
Okay.
but to.
Okay. Assuming that it's not the
I
crazy
mean, I have
conversion
my
of
own
today.
personal argument
Right?
against that,
Right.
but I'm trying to.
Assuming that they're I mean, of course, if they're faced with the type of conversion that is common today, then I can
Well, again,
completely
that's yeah,
understand the recourse being it's better that I just sort of make up my own little thing.
right,
But we're talking about like if they're actually going to be accepted as by decent human beings and treated as decent human beings.
right. So
Okay.
the question is, what would the Torah? Does the Torah say anything, teach them anything that would lead them to be able to achieve this state? That's the question.
What state? To
The state
become
of
Jewish or
living in perfection, not as a Jew, but as an acceptor of the God of Israel.
I am totally unaware of such a passage.
Well, I don't think it's one passage. I think it's basically, like you said before, I would say it's the entirety of the Torah. Meaning, just like Abraham, this is basically what I fundamentally believe Abraham did. He did not have the Torah. He did
No.
not have prophecy in the sense that, God sent him a message. This is what you should do and this is what you should not do. Because his test was specifically to see what is Abraham going to do in the vacuum of the Torah and the lack of Torah. And I believe that if, for instance, if you learn Sefer Bereshit, then you begin to see that in actuality there is a moral code of justice and good deed, which is very clear in the Torah, which is essentially mitzvah. And I believe that in actuality this is really what the Sheva Mitzvah Ben Noach is based on, that a person could intuit and divine very
That a person
pretty
could what?
straightforward.
What to it? I didn't hear the word.
Intuit and divine, meaning that if they look at the
In,
Torah and they see what the Torah says to do, and then it basically, there's two things that come out of every action that we're given. There's the specific action, and then there's the result of it.
okay.
So, for instance, I do not believe that if a person puts on tefillin, they become a more moral person just because they put on
No.
tefillin. If they contemplate the meaning of tefillin and the concept of Torah and what Torah is supposed to result in, then they can become a more moral person.
Right.
So therefore, I believe that if a person is not commanded to put on tefillin, but they learn about the Torah of tefillin, then they could come to the same result of realizing that they have to achieve a certain moral standing in order to stand before God and not be embarrassed. That kashrut, that all the laws of the Torah create a paradigm of moral standing, justice, avoidance of evil, rejection of idol worship. All these things, they just flow naturally from the Torah. And like unto Abraham, a person in this state could say, and again, the reasons why they wouldn't join, we could argue about that they should or shouldn't, but ultimately that I do believe that if a person stands and says at the end of their life that they avoided evil, they battled against evil, they lived a moral life, that the moral life that the Torah taught them, and they sought therefore to fulfill the will of God, that they will be accepted as doing exactly that to the best of their human ability. And I think that's very clear with it. That's the ultimate goal of the Torah. God doesn't want the actions specific to the Taryag mitzvot alone. He wants a result from that. And the result from that is something that can be achieved because one sees what the Torah
What you're
teaches.
referring to are the ethical type of values that are expressed in the Torah that are reinforced by the more ritual type commandments.
Correct.
Right. So I do believe that people without Torah can come to sort of ethical understanding, but I don't.
Well, no, I think this is with the Torah. This is
Sure.
with
Well,
the
okay, with
person
the Torah,
accepts the
but I don't.
Torah of God.
I don't see any nation
And I agree
maintaining.
with you.
I don't see any nation maintaining for any significant period of time ethical values without certain unique cultural structures that reinforce those values, which is possibly. I mean, there's one of the theories as to the purpose for the holidays and kosher laws as a means to sort of keep us distinct from other peoples. But when
Well,
you
let's put it
break
this
that
way. Yeah.
down, then you've also broken down sort of the safeguards that maintain this ethical nation that forms.
Yeah, but there's two things here that you're mentioning, which I do believe are important. But so the first of all, this person doesn't have to be concerned with the nation. He only has to be concerned with himself.
Well, if
In so,
go ahead.
insofar as obviously he wants to do the good of God, and so therefore he's going to reach out to help as many
Exactly.
people as possible. On the other hand, again, he's not his job is not to perfect the world. His job is to make sure that he is right with God. No different than a Jew, right? As a Jew, I am bound to my nation. That does not mean that I have an obligation to give up my life to run around trying to make everybody else a little better. Everything fits within the context of what one is capable of doing, And what I'm saying here is that it seems to me you're on a certain level agreeing with this, that because you're basically saying, well, if one wants to be part of the eternal nation, one has to do X, and I agree.
No, not
On
just the
the other
eternal
hand,
nation. If you want to influence the society around you, it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice yourself. But
no, but
if one wants to contribute to constructing a ethical society that will last, you need certain safeguards in place beyond just the bare
and I
ethical
agree with you.
aspects.
But I do believe that today, and actually I believe within Jewish philosophy, there is a recognition that sometimes that's just not really achievable. The job of the Jew, obviously, he has no choice on some levels because he's part of the nation of Israel. But the fact is that even the Rambam says that if you live in a society that's totally corrupted, run out to the desert.
Yep.
What does he
That's
mean?
that's if you can't find some other nation to join, which would be Paz. He also says that, in which case
Right,
these
but I'm saying
people would
again,
join the people of Israel rather than be in a desert
why?
all by
Because what if
themselves.
I'm sorry, but excuse me, but the people of Israel are not evidencing any great moral majority here at the moment. Now, there are the people of Israel. They are
I do think the people of Israel are particularly moral, especially in their region of the world. I don't think that they are the pinnacle of morality that we should strive for, but relatively speaking, I do think they are among the more moral of the
Yeah,
world.
but you just said it. Relatively speaking, great.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, but the fact of the matter is that
But
again,
again, it's not the Torah nation at the moment, unfortunately.
right. And so that's my point: is that this person, might truly come to recognize. Listen, I'm sure he would feel a certain amount of pain that there isn't a, a group to join. But I could fully understand if looking at the situation as it was, he said, well, I mean, there's a famous midrash that I'll use in the opposite context. Not everybody was created to have the nature to say better to be the handmaiden to Abraham than the queen in Egypt. The fact of the matter is that I could very clearly, I've seen it in certain people, for them to give up everything that they have and to come and be, downtrodden and spit upon and mistreated, and not only that, but recognize the fact that they might not, you know, really, they can't guarantee that their children are going to be able to say, "Wow, I'm part of the nation of Israel. That's amazing." Because, in other words, let's face it, when we see a lot of negativity and we see a lot of incorrect behavior, you know, we I feel it. I say, listen, I'm part of the nation and I accept that, but that doesn't always make me happy when I see behavior that's less than noble, and or even disgusting, and I have to put up with it, and I see it affect my children, and I see it affect the children around me, and I see it affect people who try and willingly convert and become part of this nation, and then they're like looked down upon or worse. I personally think very strongly that God can't possibly have demanded of all of these people that they absolutely sacrifice their lives to come, live in that situation.
I don't think that God demands it. I just don't.
Okay.
I just
No,
don't. Go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just gonna say, okay, he doesn't demand it, therefore there has to be an avenue open to
No,
them.
I'm just saying that there's no other divinely revealed
I agree. I agree 100%.
guidelines by which to follow.
No, I agree, and I think that the person to some level, it's going to take grasping the Torah. Part of the thing that I love about the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach is that, at least the way the Rambam words it, even though he seems to be limiting it, the fact is that the Torah that applies to their mitzvot is open to them. Obviously, the Torah is the book that anybody and any nation, any group of people should be using to produce this result that God wants of us. This is why I feel so sad for my own nation, because they were actually given the book and they virtually ignore it for all sorts of, much more recent and not so necessarily tied to the Torah ideologies that they've created to guide them. I've become in the last few years, I've become like what I would call a dyed-in-the-wool nationalist Torahnik, meaning I fundamentally reject philosophies that are, only a few hundred years old, that are based on picking a couple of points from the Torah and making that the totality of their effort. But no, there's only one book, there's only one philosophy, it's the philosophy of Torah. That's what we need to be following.
Amen.
And, I feel very strongly about this.
I, th- I think
Uh,
I think that was a good place to wrap it up.
I think so too, because it's about 2 o'clock in the morning for me.
Oh
So.
my gosh. All right, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Okay, yeah, 2:04. I wasn't
I'm
even
so
looking at
sorry.
this. No, don't apologize. I loved it. I
It's your
enjoyed it very
fault.
much. And right, I want to, as I said to Asher earlier, I've been wanting to get back to doing this for a long time. I enjoyed our first. Did you record this, by the way?
It's supposedly recording, but I can't promise you.
Okay, well, whatever, we'll see. If not, because I think I also can set up on
I
my
think
own
it's
computer.
valuable for people to hear. I really.
Oh, 100%. And I think there's a lot of important points here, and I think that these are the dialogues that we have to be having.
Yeah, without yelling and ridiculous
Correct,
nonsense.
100%. Thank you so much. I'd like to continue these conversations with you
Guys,
in the future. Okay, amen, amen. Chazak Baruch.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Yep.
יאללה. נעים מאוד.
Okay.
יאללה.
Amen. Bye bye.
כל טוב,
Thanks.
לילה טוב. שלום, ביי.
Bye.